This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Okay, so today we're going to dive into a pretty radical idea that history isn't just a set of facts, but a story we choose to tell ourselves. And we're going to explore this using the German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel as our guide. But here's the twist. We're not just looking at the history he actually wrote. We're going to uncover the history he could have written, but didn't. So let's kick things off with the big question that really frames this whole thing. Is history just a set of objective facts, like a fixed timeline of events, or is it something more? A story that we build, a narrative we construct for a very specific reason? To really get our heads around that question, we first need to break down what we even mean by history, because it turns out it's a lot more complex than you might think. We can actually look at it in a few different layers. Let's think about history in 3 layers. At the very bottom, you've got the facts. This is the timeline, the unchangeable stuff. A battle happened on the state, a king was crowned in that year. Simple. But on top of that, you've got experience. How did people actually feel about those events? The pride, the terror, the faith. And then at the very top, and this is the most powerful layer, is hope. This is the story we choose to build from all those facts and feelings. It's the narrative that defines who we are and who we want to become. And here's the kicker. It's on this 3rd layer that pretty much all official histories are actually written. Okay, with that framework in our back pocket, let's put it to the test. Let's look at the famous story that Hegel did choose to tell, the standard history of reason that has shaped how so many of us think about the West. So in this version, the story kicks off in ancient Greece with the birth of philosophy and rational thought. Then we get the Middle Ages, which are often painted as this dark age where reason just kind of went to sleep for a while. And finally, the whole story culminates in Hegel's own time in modern Germany, which is presented as the ultimate fulfillment of reason, embodied in the perfect rational state. It's a very clean, very satisfying story of progress, isn't it?
But why tell this story? Why frame it that way? Well, because it served a hugely powerful purpose. It was the perfect narrative to justify the institutions of the modern world, its universities, its legal systems, its governments. It made them seem not like random accidents, but like the logical, inevitable endpoint of all human history. That was the hope driving this entire narrative.
But here's where it gets really, really interesting. What if Hegel had picked a different hope? I mean, he had all the same facts to work with. He could have told a completely different, yet equally coherent story. So let's explore that, the story he didn't tell. Now, this alternate history, it doesn't start in Greece with reason. Nope. It begins with the theologian Augustine and the concept of faith. See, what Augustine did was kind of incredible. He took this specific tribal history of Israel and transformed it into a universal story of the human soul, a story of sin, redemption, and grace that literally anyone in the West could see themselves in. So just look at how the timeline completely flips. The story now starts with Israel and Augustine, the birth of a universal faith. And from this perspective, the Middle Ages are no longer a dark age. They're a period of maturity, a time when faith was protected and deepened. And the story culminates in a modern Germany whose destiny is not to fulfill reason, but to preserve faith against all the forces of modernity. Okay, this is where it all comes together. Let's put these 2 stories side by side. Remember, the underlying facts, the events, the dates, the people are identical. But just watch how the meaning changes completely based on the hope that's driving the story. It all starts with where we place our home. In the story of reason, our home is Greece, and our defining characteristic is logic. But in the story of faith, our home is Jerusalem and Rome, and our core identity is built on faith and revelation. That single choice sends the rest of history down a completely different path. And this is a fantastic example of how it works. Take a figure like Aristotle. In the story of reason, he's a hero. He's the guy who renewed knowledge and helped pull Europe out of the Dark Ages. But in the story of faith, he's a disruption. His philosophy is seen as a dangerous intrusion, a moment of confusion that introduced doubt into a world of certainty. Same person, same writings, but he's either the hero or the villain. This also shows how the narrative you choose casts a kind of moral judgment. From the perspective of reason, Britain and France are the pioneers, leading the way with science and democracy. But from the perspective of faith, they're the nations that fell away, the ones corrupted by godless science and the arrogance of believing they could rule themselves without divine guidance. And this all builds to the grand finale. What is Germany's ultimate destiny? In the story of reason, its purpose is to perfect the modern state. But in the story of faith, its purpose is the exact opposite, to be the last guardian of faith, to tame reason and make it a servant, not a master. So we've just seen two completely different stories built from the exact same set of facts. This brings us to the most important point of all. What does this whole exercise teach us about power, about purpose, and about the past? It teaches us that the defining element of any historical narrative isn't actually the facts. It's the hope, that vision of who we want to be that guides how we select and interpret every single one of those facts. This reveals that writing history is always an act of editing. It's a series of crucial choices. Where do we begin our story? What's our home? What do we value most? What's our core? And what do we want to become? What's our destiny? The answers to those questions don't just shape the future, they literally reshape the entire past. And what this means is that our goal shouldn't be to find the one true story of the past, because, well, such a thing might not even exist. Instead, the more profound task is to understand why a particular society, at a particular time, needed to tell itself a particular story. What was the hope it was trying to fulfill? And that brings us right back home, to today. If Hegel chose a story to fit the hopes of his time, it forces us to ask a really critical question. What story are we choosing to tell about ourselves right now, and whose hope does that story truly serve?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.